Welcome to another episode of Get Rich, the podcast helping you do just that. Get rich and stay rich. Cha-ching. My name is Molly Benjamin and I'm the founder of Ladies Finance Club. Now, today's episode is brought to you by InvestiKit, Australia's #1 buyer's agency for investors. And speaking of InvestiKit, today's guest is none other than its founder, Arjun Paliwal. If you've ever wondered, what exactly does a buyer's agent do? Do you really need one? How much should they cost? Can you DIY your own research? And where are the best places to buy in Australia in 2025? Then you are in for a must-listen episode. Arjun is a total property data nerd. These are his words, not ours. He knows the Australian real estate market inside out. He's helped thousands of investors scale their portfolios and make really strategic, data-driven decisions to actually build wealth. And before we get started and jump into it, here's the deal. If you learn something new or have a aha moment in this podcast episode, hit that subscribe button. Deal? All right, let's jump into it. Arjun, so excited to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for joining.
Hey, it's great to be here again. That roadshow, not long ago now, I missed it actually. Really good to travel around, be part of everything with you. And here we are again on the show.
I know, it was good times. So what I found with that roadshow, it was so helpful and the content was so fantastic you shared. So I thought, actually, let's do a podcast version of it. So for the people who weren't able to be there, or maybe the people who want to, they missed something, they can actually find this as a resource. So yeah, thanks for jumping on. And I'm going to hit you with the first question. What is a buyer's agent? Because we know what real estate agents are, but buyer's agents, I've noticed not as many people know what you guys do.
Yeah, so the best way I could explain it is a buyer's agent is a property professional who looks after the purchaser instead of looking after the seller. Now, real estate agents are typically known to sell the property at the highest price at all costs. And so for us, the buyer's agent, we're here to try to get the best price, get you in the right market, ensure you don't miss out in terms of many weekends and get access to more property, but also do it without the expensive mistakes. So it's a professional for the buyer, not the professional for the seller.
Yeah, and I love that. So real estate agent looks after the seller, a buyer's agent looks after the buyer. And with a buyer's agent, obviously you guys are very specialized. You do a lot of data, a lot of research, but do you have to use a buyer's agent or do you think you can probably do the research yourself?
Yeah, look, you don't have to use a buyer's agent. It's totally optional. I think the key thing though is that how far is your depth of knowledge and how wide is your horizon, right? So if you're living in, say, Sydney or Melbourne as an example, and you feel comfortable with Sydney, you know certain areas, that's just one part of it. Now, what about the whole country? Because if you have exposure to knowing the whole country, you're able to make the best investment decision for your portfolio rather than just based on what you know. And the same goes to what you know about negotiating versus someone who does it every day. And in our case, over 1,250 purchases. They're doing it many, many times over. So the key is it's that depth of knowledge. Yeah. It's the time you want to commit to this and the actual scope of how far you can go with your decisions rather than just what you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I hear a lot of people say, oh, I'm just going to wing it. And I'm like, these are $500,000 decisions. It's a big thing to wing. Or they'll say, oh, I'm just listening to what my parents say. And that's when I go, oh, are your parents in property? And they'll say, oh, no, they're a plumber. And I'm like, oh, do they buy lots of investment properties? Oh, no, they've only got one property. And I'm like, don't you think that makes them an expert? Good for life advice, but property advice, probably not.
Yeah, it's a good point you raised. So like 90% of Australian investors in their personal names own one or two investment properties. So the truth is, if you're speaking to your parent, there's a 90% chance that they aren't an expert or haven't done this many times over. The second thing is most people become what we call accidental property investors. Yeah. They buy an affordable home. They feel really good about it. They're on the ladder. And then life changes. They grow out of that home or out of that location. They get a bigger home and they do their best to keep their first one. And what do you know? They're now a property investor. So most property investing isn't data driven by the majority of Australians. It's driven in a way that was an emotional change to another emotional change and they left over with a property.
And I guess, do you get many people coming to you when they are in a bit of a property phobia or maybe that first investment or that first property hasn't gone as well as they would have hoped?
That's actually the most common time people come to us is when people come through and they actually have made a mistake. Yeah. There's an example I can raise of a lady by the name of Lorna Wang. She actually is someone that I mentioned, on the roadshow as well. Lorna is a lovely friend and client of ours, and she purchased a property in Southwest Sydney, and that particular property was a unit back in 2014. 10 years later, that unit has not even increased by more than $100,000, right?
Wow.
And so that's a big thing, considering most properties in Australia increased that much in just 1 year between 2020 and 21, or 21 to 22. And so the key thing there is that she made that first mistake. And here's what stings most. Because she hadn't actually seen the benefits of property investing, she delayed her future decision by 5 years. So we actually didn't meet and start investing to help her until 2019. Had she had a better first move, guess what? You're more motivated. You want to do it again. You want to give it a crack.
Yeah.
And she would have purchased multiple properties then between 2014 and 2018. Instead, none taken. 2019, she reached out for help, and we've now built her an over $3 million property portfolio with over $1 million in equity generated in comparison to 100K from that one person, one property. The rest has generated that much.
And when you say 1 million in equity, for people listening who might not quite understand what that means, can you just break that down?
Absolutely. So that's if you buy, say, a single property, let's talk about that example, $1 million property in value. Now, when you have that $1 million property in value, if that property has increased in value by $1 million and it's now worth $2 million over 3, 5, 7, or 10 years, it's now that gap between the purchase price and how much you purchased it for is that growth. And then that also your equity, because you've now got that increased $1 million. And what people traditionally do is if they don't have a huge income or a huge deposit at all times, yes, the income can support their borrowing part, but they need to get a deposit for their second or third or subsequent properties. And that's where equity can come in handy, because if you now have that property from, say, 800K has gone up to $1 million, that's 200,000 in equity. You can access up to 80 to 90% of that money from a loan from the bank. Sure, you're going to pay interest on it, but now you can use that money as a deposit and put that towards the deposit for the next purchase. And that's how Lorna was able to massively reduce the time it took to purchase multiple properties.
Okay, awesome. And could you just maybe just give us a quick overview of where did she buy? Did she buy in the same state? Were they similar types of homes?
Yeah, so that's a big one, Molly. With regards to purchasing property, it's unlikely that your backyard is the best performer every single year. So you've got to go nationally. We purchased our first one in Adelaide. Then we'd even purchased another one in Adelaide. We saw the cycle trends in 2019 saying that was going to be one of the better cities. And then we moved over to places like Brisbane and Victoria and Bendigo. The key here is she's now across 3 states when you think of the 3 markets we purchased her. 4 states if you include her own property. But the main thing is diversity lets you get the right cycles at the right time.
Awesome. And do you believe that property will always go up in Australia, even with potential government changes?
I'm definitely telling you now, it doesn't always go up. Property goes through flat periods, declines, increases in value. There are some cities, Melbourne, for example, has not increased much in value over the last 7 years. Sydney as well declined between 2019 and 2020. But that's just the short moments. If you zoom out over 20 to 30 years, property investing has been proven in Australia. And depending on which city, has had growth rates of between 5 to 8% per annum over a 30-year period. And so the main thing there is to recognize property through GFCs, through COVID, through lockdowns, through wars, through major policy changes. It's been resilient. So the key is, though, if we can take Lorna's example to diversify, you just increase the chances of something always growing in your portfolio rather than everything just coming back down or going up. We want to see different things happen at different times.
Awesome. Recently on the podcast, we had Eliza Owens from CoreLogic on, who was awesome. And she was talking to us about some of the states that had been performing really well, which were, I think it was WA, SA, and Queensland. I don't know if you can share with the audience, but where do you think it's worth buying? I mean, I know it's a question you probably get asked all the time. It's a question everyone always wants to know, where to buy. But is there a particular place we should be looking to buy? Or is it dependent on then what you're buying in that location?
So firstly, Eliza Owen, a great commentator. So for those that didn't tune into that podcast and they've heard you mention her name, I totally recommend you do tune into that episode because she drops a lot of gold. But with regards to my thoughts, there are some similarities to what she said, which is the performers for 2025 are still likely to be the markets sitting in WA, Queensland, and South Australia. But let me go that little bit deeper and explain a few cities that are standing out. So WA, you've got three standout cities, obviously Perth, Bunbury, and Geraldton. If you're heading over to Adelaide or South Australia, you've got Adelaide, Mount Gambier, and Barossa Valley. And then if you're heading over to Queensland, Cairns, Townsville, Mackay, Rockhampton, Bundaberg, Toowoomba, and Brisbane. Now, that's in order as well. I'd say the Townsville, Rockhampton are the highest performers of that market for 2025. But all of the cities I've mentioned do have some strong trends in play. Bundaberg as well, expected to do pretty good, but not as good as the other markets that I've mentioned. In terms of that three states, they're the leaders by far for capital growth in 2025. But this is now where it comes down to your own portfolio. If you're an investor, you've got two approaches you can take. I want to compete with everyone, see dozens of shoes at the open home and go, oh, here we go again. Or I want to go and buy in a buyer's market. Now you might go, why does anyone want to compete with someone? Well, there's never been a time in Australian history where capital growth has existed without competition. The only way houses rise in value is through competition, frenzies, people missing out, people losing. So if you want higher certainty of capital growth, Queensland, SA, WA, they're calling your name based on intensity and competition there. But other people go, well, it's been a few years of some good growth. I don't prioritize high growth in the short term right now. I'm okay to wait it out. I want to snag a good deal. And if you're looking at where the good deals lie, well, they're across Tasmania, they're across Victoria, they're across ACT, they're across Northern Territory, and parts of regional New South Wales too. In Victoria, there's Bendigo, Albury-Wodonga, Mildura, Geelong, Melbourne. All of these cities are demonstrating low market pressure, but that's also a good timing if you're trying to get into a market from a negotiating or buyer's market. So that's where it depends on where you are, but the highest growth rates are in that first batch of cities.
Okay, great. And with those cities, is that like the overall average, or are we talking houses as opposed to
houses? I forget it when I hear. But I think yes, apartments are being as this. Wow, it's so affordable in comparison to houses. Surely it's going to go up. There are some cities where big comebacks occurred in apartments, like Brisbane apartments were really subdued and they jumped up in value, right? There you see some parts of even Perth apartments, they're starting to jump up quickly. But the main thing is, I'm a believer that if you are just catching the jump up, you're missing out on long-term thinking. The key here is that apartments over 40 years of investing in Australia have underperformed against houses. And so if you have one big lag gap and it catches up, are you really winning that much? If you take a 10% catch up, you just called up stamp duty, lawyers, property, pest and building reports, buyer's agent, sales agent, capital gains tax, selling lawyers, repairs, that first 10 to 15% catch up is just paying for transacting on property. And so I think the main thing people should consider is going, where can I get long-term gains? And it's houses. And if you don't have a budget for houses in the city, I gave a few cities with budget more flexible for houses.
Awesome. And Arjun, you almost call yourself you do call yourself a data company as well, because you guys look at so much data across Australia. So for people who are like, yeah, I think I want to use a buyer's agent, are there any tips you would give when looking for a buyer's agent, especially around fee structure? And are there any red flags? Because I've heard obviously you guys do fantastic. You're, I believe, the number one buyer's agent voted twice in a row in Australia. But I've also heard stories where people have done a course online and they're calling themselves a buyer's agent. So how do you pick a good buyer's agent, and what kind of fees would you expect to pay?
Let me start with some red flags that answer that question on how do you pick one? Firstly, if you're not paying a fee or that buyer's agency is receiving money in other ways, then you're not the client. Because remember, the seller pays the sales agent, the seller is the client, not you. But if you're paying the fees for a buyer's agent, you're the client. And an example is when places sell off the plan apartments or townhouses, they end up saying they're buyer's agents, but they're taking a commission from the developer to sell you that. So they're actually a sales agent, but helping the buyer out in that moment of time. So that's the first red flag. The second red flag is that you may go off your hunch and say, I want to invest in this city. Then you go in and you take a Google search and you get to that buyer's agent of that city. And then you assume that that city, that buyer's agent, well connected, they're going to look after me. But what you've missed is two parts. How confident are you in your research to understand the whole country and make sure that that's the one or not? And secondly, how confident are you that a property in that market fits your overall property plan? And so if you're not confident, guess what? When you speak to that person, do you think a local buyer's agent in the city of Brisbane is ever going to tell you Brisbane's a bad place to invest in? They're never going to say that. So now you're relying on so much of your planning, your strategy, your research. They're just going to say, let's do it. So the idea there is that if you can say that you've had holistic research, had holistic support, and you feel like that's where they come in, great. But most national companies can also support nationally too with their buying. It depends on your preference on that one. So I'm not going to say one's worse than the other, but I just don't want you to go into that not knowing your research, not knowing your strategy, not knowing your plan. So that's the second red flag. In terms of fees, though, I'd say that the fees range between sort of $15,000 to $25,000 on a per property level. But then there's also others that charge percentages. For example, if you have a large owner-occupied home that you're living in, you may see buyer's agents charge a percentage, and that can be between 1.6 to 2.2% of the purchase price. So fees can vary, but in that investment landscape, that 15 to 25 is fairly normal.
Okay, so there's not really, if it's fixed or it's a percentage, like both are okay.
Yeah, it just depends on what type of place you're making. I think in an investment level, I'd say that commercials are quite common, commercial property to have a percentage base.
Yeah.
But owner-occupied homes to live in are also quite common for percentage base. But an investment, residential property, building out your portfolio, it's fixed fees for services.
Awesome. That actually leads really nicely into my next question, which is actually on commercial property, because it's something we didn't touch on the roadshow, but something that I know a lot of ladies are curious about. How has the commercial property performed, and is commercial property a good diversity strategy? So if you've got your one or two actual residentials, is it commercial something you could be looking at?
Yeah, so I can share a few things. So firstly, commercial, where it's most commonly taken up by our clients and where they realize it makes the best fit for their portfolio is when they get to somewhere between 3 and 5 residential properties. Because at 3 and 5 residential properties, you're probably going to have an asset base of total pool of value of that $2 to $5 million. And so at that $2 to $5 million, this is where people are saying, I feel comfortable to start looking at cash flow rather than growth, because how much more you're going to keep adding up and how much more of a difference does that make? So 3 to 5 seems to be the sweet spot. Some kind of get to that 5 to 7 before they move because they feel like they're a bit younger. They have time to buy more residentials, more growth ahead of them. That's the key. The second type of person for commercial is if you're a business owner or highly paid corporate professional and you feel like you've got your home, you're a little bit more mature in life in terms of age-wise, and you're getting to a life stage where you're thinking, I don't have time to wait for massive growth cycles across residential property. I want income to be my driver. I can always downsize my family home. I have my super. I have other things that are going on. And I think altogether, they'll help me clear my debt when that time comes to retiring. So I'd rather high income assets because I've got the capacity, I've got the equity, I've got the savings to do that. And so these are the two timings of entry. But where it really helps is the income game, because when people build a portfolio, no one aspires to retire with lots and lots of debt. No one aspires to retire with wealth that's just written on paper. People probably almost always want an income stream to actually grow their retirement space. And if they don't want an income stream, they've got it coming from other sources, whether it be businesses, whether it be other types of investments. And so the main thing there is that if you're really looking to get income, commercial's that vehicle, because all of a sudden you could have a $2 million property, and then suddenly instead of having 2% rental yields like they do for residential houses in Sydney, you now have 6 to 7% rental yields even after bills such as property management, rate, council, water, maintenance, and even other bills like insurances, depending on the deal.
Okay, great. Good to know.
And on that note, as well, Wally, the commercial budgets, I'd say that you don't want to get into commercial property unless you've got that budget of 1.5 million and above.
Okay.
It's not to say that you can't get in at lower budgets. We've helped people, but usually what I've found is that those that we've helped really had a big residential base and are squeezing in that last purchase. Whereas when you get to that 1.5 million above in today's market, you're in a space where you get the best type of deals. That's all.
Awesome. And just to wrap up, let's say I am a potential client and I want to use your buyer's agent service. Could you just kind of like step by step me what the process might look like?
Of course. So the first step is a consultation that's totally for free.
Yeah.
And this is where we're learning more about your goals. We're trying to understand where you're at now and what you feel is missing in order to get there. And if we are able to help, then there's onboarding to actually work with us as a client. When you're on board, you get allocated a portfolio strategist who's your go-to relationship manager. They're here to say, like, long-term, I want to help you get to your end goals, not just buy you a property.
Yeah.
They'll map out a portfolio plan to see where you are today, where you're trying to get to, and reverse engineer the property purchases you need to get there. When to buy, when to not buy, when to sell. And then we move over to the next part, which is providing you all the research from our research division. You're getting clear from our strategy person to saying for your portfolio, these markets seem best fit based on our research.
Yep.
Then our acquisitions team come in, they start searching for the property, and anywhere between 1 to 3 or 2 to 4 months, we're able to go through a few places, list out some, and eventually secure it. And then the combination of client success team and acquisitions team come together to handhold from the purchase time all the way through to settlement and finding a tenant and making sure everything goes smoothly, making sure that you don't have to have much on your hands, much on your plate, know that they negotiate the best price, find something off market and take you through that process.
Great. So then you actually help you find tenants for the property as well.
Yeah, we work closely with property managers to tell them, hey, we think it could be this much rental.
Yeah.
And then they'll have applications that come in, and should the client feel confident, they'll just go off the decision on the property manager. But should they need to check in with us to go, what are your thoughts on this? We're always there to help.
Love that. Okay. So if you're wondering what the process is, that is the process. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Arjun. And you have a podcast as well. You've got a Property Nerds?
The Property Nerds. We're on Spotify, Apple. If you want to check it out, follow us. And also the InvestiKit podcast. So we've got 2 shows going on.
Okay, awesome. So if you love Arjun and what he's talking about and want to learn more about property data, what's going on in the Australian market, definitely check out Property Nerds. And my final question I ask every guest on this show is, are you reading anything good at the moment, or have you read anything that you think would be cool for the audience to learn? Doesn't have to be property related, but it might be.
There's a book, and I could get the title wrong, but a guy by the name of Dan Martell, and it's about buying back time.
Yeah.
I think that might literally be the title, so I have to double check that. But basically, I was in the USA recently, and I was in a boot camp in Miami, and one of the coaches at the boot camp recommended that book, and it's changed my eyes as a business owner in terms of the impact an EA can make on your life and your business. And I've now committed to that. And literally this week we're launching a role. So that is going to go up on the internet and hopefully have the right EA for our business in January in 2025. So yeah, look, it's something where the book was great. It was really helpful. That was just one segment of it, but I wanted to point that out because more important than reading is also the action you take from what you read.
Fantastic. So buy back your time. And actually as well, I saw Dan Mattel was just on my friend's podcast as well, the $100 MBA. So I might go check that out. So a few podcast recommendations, a few book recommendations. Arjun, thank you so much for your time and sharing so generously all your knowledge with our listeners.
Thank you so much. Cheers.
Awesome. And guys, if you want to learn more about Arjun, I'm going to pop all the links in the show notes so you can just pop there and connect with him there.